Hey, this is Frigus Raid, and today I'm on a clanmates account, and I'm going to continue in my mini-series of 2-1 team comps that are affinity safe. And the first one I did was Doom Priest, and showed how to work her into a 2-1 comp to be green affinity safe. And this one I'm going to show you is using, instead of cleanses, block debuffs. So where you would run Doom Priest as the very first champ, or the slowest champ, or Bad Alcazar, or whomever you might want to use, in this instance you would run the champion last or nearly last, so that their block debuffs would not be lost. And really the key with the block debuffs is they have to be after Mashald if you want to do a block debuffs that blocks both the AoE and the stun. If you're willing to just do the AoE and you have a champ with a 3-turn cooldown, you could easily just put it on AoE 2 and have somebody eat the stun. With Brogni, he's on a 3-turn cooldown. He's actually set up perfectly to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Brogni for the AoE, and then I'm also going to use Brogni to cleanse the stun, at least in one of the cases. This setup will have some manualing. This setup typically syncs on turn 8. I'm going to have to do a little bit of work to make this sync up as I go, but as I walk through it, we'll talk about the steps that you typically take and where you want it to show up. I'll show you the comp real quickly. There's a faster version of, or a slower version of this comp, and that's what I'd actually recommend for most people. But this is this build works pretty similar. It's just got slightly higher speeds on Mashald, on Valkyrie, and on Brago. So it's, in general, the other one is preferable, and I'll show you that at the end of this run as well. But this particular setup, as you can see, it will sync up turn 8. As you can see, for green, you're going to have Brogni's A3 do the block debuffs on this one, no problem. You're going to see that somebody's going to take the stun, and that somebody is going to be Rhazin, since this is a weak affinity scenario. Brogni will be able to cleanse it with his A2 right there. Then we're going to delay his A3 again until we get to the end of turn 4, and at that point we'll use his A3 again so that it blocks debuffs and makes you safe. At this point in time, you'll see the stun be taken again. This time it's going to be a little bit trickier because you'll see Brogni won't cleanse it. That's okay. Our goal then is just going to be to get back on track, and then by the time we go into the end of turn 7, we'll have synced up and we'll have a completely affinity safe comp. Alright, we're ready to start this up. I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. We'll start off right away with Valkyrie's A2. We'll start off with Brogni's A2 as well. Mashald, we'll hold off on the A2, we'll do his A3. Brago, we'll start off with the A2, and Rhazin, we'll start off with the A2. Just gonna A1 with Brogni. We're gonna go ahead with Marshald's A1. Brago's A3, Rhazin will do his A1, Valkyrie A1, and Brogni will do his block debuffs. Alright, so you can see we're clear on that one. Now Marshall will do his speed boost. Brago will just hit A1. Valkyrie will use the shield. Now, to stay on track, Brogni with A2. I'm just going to A1 right here because I'm going to use that in a second. Brago will do defense. And there went the stun. It was on Rhazin, and he blocked the debuff. So we'll just do the A1 with Brogni. Follow with the A2. Marshall. The A3 with Brago. And normally you'd use Brogni's A3 here. Again, I'm going to hold off on it because I know that I want to use the block debuffs on the way in. So we'll just skip it for the time being. And instead, I think I will be able to extend the shields. A2, Brago A1, Brogni can go ahead. Alright, we'll go ahead and use the block debuffs again. That'll prevent us from any problems. You can see so far we're good to go. Now this will sync up by turn 8, and really by turn 7 we'll be completely on track. So from this point in, this should be pretty smooth sailing. Rhazin, Brago. Normally Brogni would do his A3. I'll just A1 right here. Marshall will go. With somebody from weak affinity, I don't think they'll be able to resist stunning Rhazin. And they went right after him. That's perfect. That sets us up for Brogni to use his A2. Brago will go A1. Marshall A1. Valk A1. Brogni A1. Go Rhazin. Use Brago's A2. At this point in time, we should be able to press auto. I'm going to go ahead and put down the block debuffs. This does have a 2-turn cooldown, or 2 turns, so it's clear for the second pass. And from here on in, this should be a completely affinity safe unkillable with block debuffs up the entire time. Covered well with defense. Again, I expect this to do just extremely well. It is a weak affinity for Rhazin, who's one of the 2 big damage dealers in this comp. So you will see that this is, although it's a strong comp, you're going to see that this isn't going to do incredible damage just because the #1 damage dealer on the team is going to be weak affinity. But you should see this is a very straightforward to run. You can really run Brogni on this in normal setups too, and the normal setups that I have seen, will, you know, with moderate gear, and I'll show you the gear here. I would not consider this gear to be exceptional. The account I'm on, he mostly runs Fire Knight. He does not run hardly any Dragon, and you know, you'll see that his gear is acceptable, but not great from my perspective. I'm used to much stronger gear, but this is a 1-key comp though on Void. He's done, you know, between 80 and 90 million, I believe, are his usual keys. So pretty solid damage he puts out from it. And it remains solid on any affinity. You know, you can see right here, this is doing good. This is gonna mainly suffer because Rhazin will weak hit and miss defense downs, and there's no way to recover from that in terms of damage. That's going to be the #1 thing that limits this, and probably I'll be pleasantly surprised if it 1-keys because of that. But this should be a very comfortable 2-key, and if you had a champion who was a better affinity for this setup, you could easily have Brago or Alton or another champion take the stun, probably Brago, and again with the block debuffs on, you know, you wouldn't miss a beat for the most part. I mean, you could, with the block debuffs, frankly, you could even let Valkyrie take the stun if you wanted. She has the highest amount of defense on this team, and very easily could be used to take the stun on Void if you wanted. I think that's the best damage path because, you know, in his setup, he's running her, you know, in the neighborhood of 6,500 defense, which is good enough to do the trick. I wouldn't say it's exceptional by any means, but it works. And you know, once you see the gear, you'll see that this is a very solid comp. The other thing you can do with Brogni is you can not use him, and you can fit in another champ in this spot. Very honestly, in this particular comp, it would be very easy to put Lydia in this spot, or really any champion who has a strengthen type of effect or an ally protect. So I would suggest that this comp will work pretty good for, you know, using Tyrant Lixmore or something too. So you could easily, if you wanted to do a lot more damage on Void affinity, you could easily use a strengthen or an ally protect champ in Brogni's spot, and then use Brogni only on affinities to ensure that you have the ally protection. You know, Brogni is an awesome champ. His toolkit is extremely flexible and really good in a lot of places. The main reason he's good in Clan Boss in terms of damage is because of the reflect that you see. You can see all the numbers flying up whenever he attacks. That's both heals, but also you know, damage dealing coming from him. And by using Giant Slayer in his build, you should see that every attack procs, you know, maybe a handful of extra damage from Brogni's reflect, and it's and the fact that it can proc extra damage is a real bonus to the setup. So that's where a lot of his damage comes from. Beyond the damage, he's mainly just excellent because of two things he does. You know, he can both do block debuffs, or he could do the cleanse job, but additionally, on top of that too, he does bring a shield of his own, so you could use him in a comp where you didn't really have a champ with a shield. So say you had a Skull Crusher, a very reasonable comp might be, you know, Skull Crusher, Mashald, Brago, Brogni, and Rhazin. I mean, that would be a a very strong comp that provided the Rhazin and Skullcrusher were geared well, would 1 key. So it's definitely a real good setup. I mean, you can see that this is going real good. I'm just going to go ahead and let it run to the end, and I'll come back, I'll show you the results, and then I'll go over their gear. All right, you can see that we're past turn 50 now, and it's still going. It looks like we are going to get to that 1 key number. Everybody's still alive. Brogni's kept them out of trouble with the stun. The damage has been real solid. And if you take a look at this, with Brogni pumping his shield onto to Rhazin each time, you're also you're lasting a lot more on the stun than you would normally. So you can see this actually works really well on Affinity. And for those of you who saw the Doom Priest video, now mind you, the Doom Priest setup was not using Valkyrie. I'd rerun it with Valkyrie, but you can see that, you know, much more robust. Now, looks like Marshall did die here. We'll have to take a look at that and see his overall defense and hit points. As I recall, this account is not built real strong. If you take a look at the damage right now, this is what's crazy. At least on this account, the #1 damage dealer on this fight was Brogni. And now, he's strong Affinity in this fight, and that's huge. That's a huge part of this. But, you know, overall, it's a really good spread. Normally, Rhazin is the #1 damage dealer on this team. But, you know, certainly just a really solid outcome. And, you know, definitely, you know, really nice. I'm going to go ahead now and just take a quick look at the gear with you guys, and we'll go from there. All right, now we're going to go ahead and just take a quick look at the overall gear and setup of these champions. We will start with Rhazin. So Rhazin is in stalwart gear. You can see his overall stats: 4,500. Defense, 80% crit rate, 200% crit damage, and 222 accuracy. A little on the low side, but all in all, his #1 damage dealer is under normal circumstances. Again, you know, Ozzy doesn't run much dragon, so this is you know, kind of limited what could be done there. The mastery is a kind of a relatively normal setup. Now let me go ahead and go into Brogni. This is our guy. He had Brogni already set up with this for dungeon runs. I just left it. Honestly, I would probably, in a perfect world, put that right into the defense tree, just like everybody else. And this setup's pretty okay. Right now, at least, you saw the 19 million damage. That Giant Slayer does a lot of extra damage in the reflex, and is well worth it. And by and large, this setup works perfectly. I mean, if you were trying to milk a little extra damage, or survival, you could probably do something like this. You'd probably go down the tree, just the typical the typical mitigation path. But you know, this clearly worked pretty well in this setup. So again, he also is in stalwart. Right now he's at 59k and 3,800 defense. On this team setup, I think he could have probably actually reduced this just a little bit and get away with it. Again, this was a matter of what gear was available that had the right speeds because of the very limited nature of his setup. So he's in defense gloves He's in defense chest. I'd probably, in a perfect world, replace one of those two with a hit point chest, and run him, more like 3,000 defense or so. He doesn't need to be quite as high as he is. And then hit points, and accuracy. So, and honestly, if you had really good gear, like most things, you'd probably either have them in crit rate or crit damage. But again, this is an account that doesn't have much stalwart, so we had to work with what we had. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at Brago. Brago, kind of a similar setup. You can see his crit rate is low, actually. Again, it's what we had to work with. The speed, 222, 5,400 defense. Just kind of breeze through his gear and show that's a real good piece. Again, it's what we had. He doesn't have that many pieces that would help that. This would be nice to replace. Again, you need something with more speed on it though to do that. And we did get him in defense boots, so that was a plus. Masteries are the same. This was already set up, and I just left it as well. Normally for me, I probably go back down there, but this is inconsequential. Take a look at Valkyrie. This is pretty canned. Masteries. As far as gear goes, you can see she's at 6,600. There's definitely room to improve. The crit rate and crit damage, this is nice if it's better. It's clearly, as long as your damage dealers are there, you can get a 1 key without that. So that's still pretty solid. If you go through Valkyrie's gear, you can see a couple 3 rolls are really enabling this. Defense. In a perfect world, you make this defense, but this thing is so good. It was just hard to say no to. And it made gearing the other stuff a lot easier, especially on this account where there's not a tremendous amount of speed. In a lot of cases, when I don't use speed boots and I try to get into defense, this is all speed. It's 6 speed pieces. So, with this and him especially not having a defense with a real high speed, this was pretty much the best option, so we went with it. That's Valkyrie. And then last of all, we have Marshald. You didn't see Marshald was the one who died in this thing from a slam on turn 55. They do ramp up as they go. I think that was just an unlucky crit. I think that probably would have actually gone a little bit farther, but his hit points are lower than I'd normally run him at. I'd probably like him to be in the 40s. Again, this was just a matter of what gear was available that could get to this speed, because to get him in stalwart at this speed is a little bit challenging. So here's at 243, just under 3,000 hit points, and he is crit capped. So that's one thing that could be changed. If you were really trying to make him tanky, you could put him in a defense. He would lose a fair amount of his damage though by taking away his crit cap. Again, defense chest, speed, and then speed and defense. Not as much crit rate as I'd like, or I mean hit points as I'd like, but again, this is working with what you've got. I do have him in crit damage here. Another thing to make him a little more tanky, you could put him in a hit point. I don't know if there's one that you could do this. That would be more defense. That probably would be the best option if you were trying to make him more tanky. Just quickly looking at what he has. But ultimately, then a real good accuracy piece too. So, and the mastery is the same. The only difference, you did go with rejuvenation, so he has a little more shield to work with. Otherwise, it's pretty much the normal. In any case, you can see this gear is not crazy, but you can do a pretty solid one key with it, and with any kind of a champion who can do block debuffs with this particular speed tune, you can achieve a pretty nice result. Certainly Brogni did very well in this setup. I will post this particular speed tune, and I will post an alternate speed tune that syncs later but has slower speeds. So if you're willing to trade a turn later of syncing, you can have a faster or a slower champion requirement. So it's probably a good trade. For most accounts, that's going to be desirable, and I will post it. As I said, I think that this particular speed tune will also really be good for somebody who wants to use an ally attack and then just work Brogni in when it's affinity. So definitely a lot of options here. If you have questions or comments, by all means leave them in the comment sections below, or you can reach out on the Heart Up Heroes Discord. The links to that will be in the description, as well as the speed tune information. Have an excellent evening.